Thank you. Speaker, we're here to talk about tax. A lot of people are intimidated by the mention of tax, so let's start with why tax matters. It matters because tax shapes the country we want to be. When I think about why it's great to be an Australian, I often think of my mum's life, because she was a kid who arrived from Italy at the age of 11, with no money, no English and no connections. She finished school at 14, and because of her own talent, energy and luck, she was able to create a great life for her and her family. When I think about the country we want Australia to be, we want to be a country that encourages innovation, creativity and entrepreneurialism, a place where every individual can boldly bring their best talents to the community and to the world. But we also want to be a country where every Australian can create a good life for themselves and their families, whatever their background, whatever job they do. And we want to be a country where you're not on your own when things go wrong. Our tax system needs to support these goals: entrepreneurialism, fairness, a good life and compassion. But right now it isn't, and that is why we need to talk about tax. The topic today is the Stage 3 reforms that the government has made changes to and now in front of the House. Now, I acknowledge right now many people across the country, and including in my community, are experiencing enormous financial strain, some of the hardest times they've ever faced. And I see that it is absolutely appropriate the government does whatever it can to ease their burden right now. I acknowledge that the Stage 3 changes that the government is going to put through will help a lot of families who need it right now. So let's understand what the government is putting through, but also what are the choices and costs of what they have decided to reject. Firstly, as I acknowledged, it's going to help a lot of people, a lot of working families experiencing financial strain. Secondly, I acknowledge that the changes to Stage 3 will improve Labor participation, and that is really important. I think it's going to be about 930,000 hours per week. They expect more people will be more working in the economy. And that is actually a really positive difference, particularly to the lives of women. And I think that this is a package that has support from broad ranges of the community. But we are also giving things up by making these changes to Stage 3, and I do not think that these have been acknowledged appropriately. Firstly, we are giving up a lot of benefits in terms of simplifying the tax system, particularly making one bracket from, instead of having 4 different brackets, having one bracket from 45,000 to 200,000, which was the original Stage 3. That would ensure that for a lot of people, the desire to plan taxes, to use maybe company structures, other things, to try and minimise their taxes are no longer attractive. That will actually add to the integrity of our tax system. It will make it simpler and make it easier to administer and make less likely that people are going to use complicated other structures to avoid taxes. Secondly, it addressed, in the original Stage 3, addressed bracket creep and incentives that this stage, the revised government proposal, doesn't. And while I support the opportunity that the government's proposal has made to increase Labor participation, particularly at the lower income scales of the parliament, of the country, this also misses out the opportunity to do it at the higher income scales and address the bracket creep at the higher income scales, which I think is absolutely appropriate as well. So I supported the original Stage 3, and when I came to considering whether I support the government's changes, the thing I thought was most important was go back to the community, because I knew that the community was going to be significantly affected by these changes, and I wanted to know what they thought. So in Wentworth, what we found through extensive consultation, both with people on the street, through emails, but also through a survey, which ended up with over 1,700 responses, we found that 70% of the community supported the changes. And there was stronger support, particularly among older parts of the community. There were many people who said they would benefit enormously from these changes, and there were also those people who said, you know what, I would have been better off under the original package, but I am supportive of the changes because I believe that these are the right ones. As one said to me, I will pay more tax, but I do not have a problem with that. I think we need to maintain a fairer, progressive tax system. And that was something that came across from many members of the Wentworth community. However, there are some people in Wentworth and across the country, who are significantly negatively affected by these changes, and have real concerns about them. And as, for example, one family wrote to me and said, "It's going to have a big impact on my family. We are both in our 30s, 2 kids full-time in daycare, huge mortgage, cost of living increasing. We were relying on this cut, and now half of it has been stripped away." And I think that is really important to raise that and to talk about these people, because I do not think we've been having the conversation about the people who are affected in this case. I started my speech talking about this idea of fairness and of everybody being able to build a good life. And one group I really think about a lot are about younger people who don't have family backing to buy a house or get themselves set up. All they've got is the sweat of their brow, what they can build themselves. I admire those people who can really build up and create a different life to the ones that they brought up with themselves. And this is, I think, what a lot of the Australian dream is really based about. But in a country where we rely so heavily on income taxes and on taxing working people, as we do currently, it means those people, if they don't have financial backing, means they can't get ahead in the way that previous Australian generations could. And I think of this group of these young people in their 30s. Maybe they don't have family who can help them with a mortgage. Maybe they don't have family who can help them with a deposit. They started out, they've built this up, and they were relying on the government to do what they said they were going to do and deliver a tax package, and that's what they did in terms of their family budgeting. So that is really, what I want to consider, and I think we need to reflect on as we think through what else needs to change on tax. Based on the feedback from Wentworth and on broader considerations, I am going to support this package. But what I'm going to say, and I've said publicly and I will say to all across the House, is that this mustn't be the end. This is we have a flawed tax system, and this must be the parliament that starts to address it. And the next election, we need to see ambitious tax reform onto the agenda. Because I think what we have with the original Stage 3 and right now is a missed opportunity. When I look at the tax system, the question I ask is, not the academic ones of, how do we optimise this from an economist's point of view? What I really care about is what is this going to do for Australian people? And there are 3 massive challenges I think we are facing as a country that our current tax system does not address. And these are intergenerational equity and housing. They are about growth and productivity. And they're about how do we address our climate action. And our tax system currently does not address this. And while the changes to the Stage 3 and the other government changes that the government has made, will make some impact on the economy, they do not fundamentally affect or address the major issues facing our economy. And that is why we need broader tax reform. For example, to give you a couple of perspectives on intergenerational equity, if you look at sort of what is happening to younger generations, there is a sense, as there was from a young man who came to see me, that you can do everything right. You can study hard, you can get a big HECS debt, you can get a good job, but you still don't know if you'll ever be able to afford a home. And, that's the feeling on the street, but that's actually also represented in the numbers, where you see that a household who is headed by somebody over the age of 65 has had an increase in wealth by around 50% in the last 10 or so years. But a household headed by someone under the age of 35 has had pretty much no increase in wealth. So we've seen a disparity emerging between the wealth and prospects of different generations in our society. And I do not support that, and I think that is why we need to look at tax, because tax influences that. Our capital gains tax system, our negative gearing tax system, our stamp duty, they all influence the housing market in different forms. And we should be, and the housing market has been one of the biggest ways that younger people have been trapped out of building the wealth and building the security that previous generations have. You see, for example, in stamp duty, the New South Wales Treasury's own estimate said that 350,000 more people would be owning their own home if we could move from stamp duty into land tax. And this is where the reform that is urgently needed across our system. The second major issue, I think, facing our economy is growth. Now, Australia has low and productivity growth, and so do many other economies. But why do we care about productivity growth? Because it drives our ability to pay for the services that we want. If we had the long-term productivity growth that we had in the past, we would have literally estimated $50 billion more in our budget right now to supply and support things that are important, or to give back to the people who earn that money, the taxpayers. But we don't have that strong productivity growth, and my concern is that we also don't have the policy settings to drive that. One of the big policy settings that we need to be aware of is the tax system. We have a corporate tax system where companies with revenue over $50 million are now paying 30% tax. Now, this is way out of step with the OECD, where the average is 24.5%. We cannot pretend in this country, in one of the most open and trading countries of the world, that our tax system and the fact that we have an uncompetitive tax system, for medium-sized businesses does not affect the attractiveness of Australia as a destination for investment. And what we're seeing right now is Australia now being a capital exporter rather than a capital importer. And we're also seeing Australia right now with low R&D investment and dropping foreign direct investment. These are all indicators that not only do we have sluggish productivity, but it is not growing and we're not making the changes that we need to actually grow our productivity in the future, and that is problematic for our system. And finally, on climate, I think that we're in a situation where we know we need to make the changes, and we're starting to make the changes that we need to address the climate catastrophe that we have in front of us. But the way that we're doing this, because we will not deal with the tax system, is some of the most expensive ways that we could possibly do this. We are wasting money because we won't face up to the fact that our tax system is not equipped to deal with the climate emergency that we're facing, and it means that the investments that we make cost us more money than otherwise they would. And that is why we need to also reform our tax system in relation to climate. So when I look at this stage 3 change, and I look at the other changes that the government has put through, which include superannuation, PRRT, changes to FBT on electric vehicles, and other pieces. There are some parts I agree with, there are some parts I disagree with, some bits on the margin. But my point is constantly that, I know that tax change is difficult, and I accept that many a career has been won and lost on the basis of tax changes. But we need to be more ambitious, and we across the parliament have a responsibility both not to wedge each other on these issues, and I'm afraid I haven't seen that yet, but we need to make sure that we across the parliament face up to the extreme issues that the country is facing and have the guts to deal with them. I think a major question I need to address in this speech is around integrity and broken promises, and because this is clearly a broken promise, and my electorate, probably more than any other, feels that because the effects are felt. In my electorate, more than most, because of the incomes of people in my electorate. And I think I have 3 issues with what the government has done from that. I recognise that governments will need to change when circumstances change. I think that is appropriate. However, I think from a timing point of view, if the government was contemplating a change like this, they should have done as much as they could have to do it as early as possible, so that the people who were affected, the people who were budgeting, the people who got into rentals and maybe made decisions about houses based on what they expected their income to be, knew what they were getting into. And I think that is unacceptable. The second piece I'm really concerned about is the lack of acknowledgement by the government that some people really lost out and some people took them on their word. The government Trump has spoken a lot about the difference it's making to other people in the country, and I support that, and that is why I'm voting for it. But they should also acknowledge the people who have been affected negatively by this change in taxes, and took the government at its word and were told to be able to trust the government on this. And finally, my question to the government is whether they should have made that change in whether they should have made the commitment to stage 3 in the first place, given that they have now said they're not interested in further changes that would support the original stage 3 package. Because if they're not willing to support further changes that would address what stage 3 was trying to do, it gives us a real sense that they weren't really backing it in the first place, and I have real concern about that. This is the moment to deal with tax reform. We must do it in the next, come to the next election, and this is a challenge across the parliament.